Welcome to the Charities and Crypto Opportunities, Safeguards, and Readiness session. This webinar is presented by Bono SG and Singapore Fintech Association. I am Dylan Lolo, your moderator for this webinar. Please note that today's discussion is not intended to substitute any form of professional legal advice. If you require specific legal advice, please consult a legal professional. With that said, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today's webinar, Adrian, Chinta, and Usha. Unfortunately, Abel is unable to join us today, but I think we have enough here to give you some clarity on charities. So first off, Adrian. Adrian is a partner in the Financial Services Department and is a co-head of both the firm's Fintech practice and its ESG and public policy practice at Gledhill. His practice encompasses advising clients on regulatory matters affecting the financial services industry, including licensing matters, the setting up of payment services, distribution of financial products, outsourcing arrangements, contra business requirements, and so on and so forth. He is consistently recognized for his expertise in financial regulatory work in Chambers Global, Chambers Asia Pacific, and Legal 500, and has been voted as a first-class lawyer. Prior to joining Allen & Gledhill in 2011, Adrian was with the MAS and was in legal practice in London and Singapore with a leading international law firm for several years. Next off, we have Chinta. Chinta oversees strategy and operations for the Singapore market for Crypto.com, driving user growth, partnerships, regulatory affairs, and community engagement. As a home market leader, he is also supporting the founders on key organizational initiatives. Before joining Crypto.com, he spent 15 years with the Singapore government at the Economic Development Board, or EDB, and Digital Industry Singapore. Chinta spearheaded economic strategy for the digital technology sector, shaped human capital and town policy, and held leading business development roles based out of New York and Sao Paulo. He is active in the local Web3 and Fintech community, serving as a blockchain guardians and pay it forward mentor for youth and professionals, and sits on the Web3 committee for the SFA. And lastly, we have Usha. Usha is an adjunct associate professor and course coordinator of the International Tax and Tax Trade Law program at NTU. She holds independent directorships in listed entities and has volunteered with Bono SG and other charities for over a decade. She served as a council member of the Law Society of Singapore from 2014 to 2015, and previously worked at PBSG as part of the Secretariat. Usha is currently a consultant with Withers, KhattarWong's private client and tax practice. And after commencing postgraduate studies in Asian art histories in 2016, she founded Plural Art Mag, a Singapore-based digital art magazine. And from 2023 to 2025, she served as the nominated member of the Parliament of Singapore, representing the arts. She is an advocate solicitor at the Supreme Court of Singapore, chartered accountant, and chartered tax professional. Adrian, Chinta, Usha, thank you and welcome. So today we're addressing two things that people often don't associate together: crypto and charities. Let's talk about what's happening in our region. Across Singapore and Southeast Asia, we're seeing a steady shift in how people choose to donate, particularly among young donors who are increasingly comfortable with digital assets, and major financial institutions slowly including digital assets as part of their charitable mandates. Crypto global donations have crossed the $2 billion mark in recent years, which tells us this isn't a passing trend. For charities, this raises a practical question. How do you meet donors where they are, especially when where they are increasingly includes the crypto space? That's what we're here to explore today. Our goal is straightforward: to simplify crypto donations as much as possible and to give you a clearer picture of what this could mean for your organization. Before we begin, we'll run a quick poll to see where everyone stands. The question is simple: has your charity considered accepting crypto donations? Whether you've already started exploring this or haven't, we'd love to know. To help our panelists better understand the participants of this webinar better, we'd also be launching the poll, so we'll give you a minute to submit your answer. Okay, great. Let's take a look at the results of the poll. I see the results. I just don't see the exact numbers, but overwhelmingly, the answer is no. Your charity has not considered accepting crypto donations. So it's interesting, and I'd love to dive more into that. But first, maybe we'll just dive into the background or legal and reg framework for charities in Singapore. Usha.
Thank you, Dana. And for kicking us off, I'd like to get the slide deck onto the first slide, please. So the question we're looking at today is really, can charities accept crypto donations and hold crypto investments and assets? And the short answer to this question is really, well, there's no explicit prohibition, all right? Crypto is a property and an asset that is capable of being donated in kind, just like any other non-cash gift that a charity might receive. That being said, practically speaking, there are a number of considerations that you do need to keep in mind if you are thinking of opening up your donation channels towards accepting cryptocurrency. The next thing you want to think about in relation to cryptocurrency assets is really, what are you going to do with them? Now, do you want to just have the ability to receive them in the form of donations, or do you want to be able to, say, diversify your reserves and investments and hold them as crypto assets? But before we go into all of these details, and the slides, will be covering all of these points and more, let's just take a step back and look at some definitions. So what exactly is a charity? A charity is an institution, corporate or not, which is established for charitable purposes as is subject to the control of the High Court in exercise of the court's jurisdiction with respect to charities. And of course, charities, as we know, are governed by the Charities Act 1994 in Singapore. Charitable purposes are set out in the slide. I won't read them all. I'm sure you're all already familiar with them, especially if you come from charities. But what I want to emphasize here with this slide is that a charity is not at all like a private entity, for example, a private limited company. The assets of a charity really have to be applied to further the charitable purposes or objectives of the entity. And so when we think about donations of cryptocurrency, we need to bear in mind that the acceptance of crypto donations has to be something that is aligned with your charity's objectives and purposes. It has to be something that serves the best interests of the charity and does not expose the charity to any type of excessive risk. Now, the next bullet point that you'll see on this slide asks, what is a cryptocurrency? And for that, I'm going to hand over to Adrian to talk a little bit about what cryptocurrencies actually are.
Thanks very much, Professor. So, I think it'd be useful to get the terminology correct when we talk about cryptocurrencies. People often use terms like digital assets, cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, tokenized real-world assets, and there is some amount of confusion as to what all of this means, right? So I think it's useful to set out a framework to understand the different categories and what we're talking about today. So when we talk about cryptocurrencies, when we talk about digital assets in general, this is like an umbrella heading. You could have cryptocurrencies, you could have stable coins, you could have security tokens, you could have non-fungible tokens even, right? So that's digital assets is just an umbrella category. It's not a term of art. When we talk about cryptocurrencies in Singapore, so examples of cryptocurrencies would be things like Bitcoin, Ripple, Litecoin, Ether, and so on. In Singapore, most of these kinds of cryptocurrencies would be considered digital payment tokens, or DPT in short. And that's actually a term of art that comes under our Payment Services Act. Separately, when we talk about stable coins, in Singapore, stable coins right now are considered DPTs as well, digital payment tokens, and are regulated as such. But I think it's worth thinking about the difference between normal cryptocurrencies and stable coins. Normal cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ether, generally speaking, they're not pegged or denominated in any fiat currency. One Bitcoin is always equal to $1. In fact, the headlines that you read in the news usually revolve around cryptocurrency, the price of cryptocurrencies moving up and down in quite significant ways. When we talk about stable coins, as the name implies, these coins stability. The most common kind of stable coins would be single currency stable coins. So coin like USDT or USDC are denominated in fiat currency. And so one USDC is meant to always be equal to $1. The reason why it's stable is because for these single currency stable coins, the issuer of the stable coin actually takes the $1 and right, and this $1 is meant to always be in the licensed bank in that trust account as long as that stable coin is in circulation. And that's the thing that creates the stability in terms of price. Now, just a short detour here. When we talk about stable coins, as I said, single currency stable coins, the most common understanding of stable coins. But you also have algorithmic stable coins. For those who follow digital assets, there was a scandal involving Terra Luna USD, which is a kind of algorithmic stablecoin, a couple of years back. And essentially, algorithmic stablecoins are those where they are meant to be pegged or denominated in fiat currency, but there is no real fiat currency in a trust account with a licensed financial institution. The stability is created usually via smart contracts. So you would go into the market if the price is too high. If the algorithmic stablecoin's price is too high, you would go into the market and you would sell these stablecoins into the market to lower the price, vice versa. So that's how stability is achieved. But usually there are problems with safeguarding mechanisms, and as I said before, Terra Luna USD failed spectacularly. And as a result of this, many regulators, such as those in the UAE and I think in Europe as well, have actually effectively banned algorithmic stablecoins. So when we talk about stable, we are talking about single currency stablecoins, A and USDC. Okay. The last point I'll make is tokenized real world assets. People often describe them in the context of digital assets as well, but we're not talking about them today. Security tokens or tokenized real world assets are essentially products such as shares, bonds, units of a fund that are in token form. They are tokenized versions of these traditional capital market products. So we're not talking about them today for obvious reasons. People are not generally going to donate a bond to the charity, or they're not going to donate to the charity, right? Usually what's going to happen is they will get digital payment tokens, i.e. cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ether, and the like, or they would donate single currency stable coins like USDC. So today we're talking about only those two things. Professor, back to you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. That's explanation, and I'm particularly interested in what you talked about when you were against a lot of the assumptions that we have, maybe or preconceived notions that we might have about cryptocurrencies and what the risks of holding them actually relate to. So that's something I hope we can come back to, and hope to hear from our fellow panelists as well, their thoughts on stable coins and the risks associated with them. But for now, let's go back. I'm going to go into the considerations to bear in mind when you're making the assessment of whether or not to accept crypto donations if you're a charity. But before I do that, I just want to go straight into some practical concerns. Now, I see a question in the pigeonhole asking, what is fiat? Fiat refers to currency, right? Currency or cash. And so that's what I'm referring to when I have that reference there in the slide. And so when you think about whether or not you can accept...
Actually, Usha, can I just interrupt? And I've got a good story on fiat.
I was going to ask you about the story because I've heard the story before, but I don't know how much you have. So you can say it, but keep it brief.
I'll brief. So, one of the things I like to ask people when I do presentations is, why is it called fiat, right? Why is it called fiat currency? Fiat currency is just your conventional currency like Singapore dollar and US dollars. It's called fiat because it's actually a Latin term that means let it be so. So in olden days, an emperor would have said, everyone should eat bread for breakfast, fiat, right? And so that's essentially it. Now, why is fiat currency called fiat? It's because Richard Nixon, I think it's 1971 or 73, actually removed the US dollar peg. And with that, he just said US dollar is meant to be currency in the US, and therefore it is so. And that's actually the origination of why it's called fiat currency.
Thank you for that, Adrian. As you can see, we've had very active discussions behind the scenes, when we were putting this panel together. So thank you for that historical, nugget of information for us. Okay, so back to what's on the slide deck. So once a charity accepts that it can, solicit and accept crypto donations, the next key question to ask yourself is really, what are you going to do with it? Okay, so we'll go into the assessment of whether or not you can do it, whether or not you should do it. But once you decide you want to do it, what then do you have to think about? And the first decision is really whether you're going to put your crypto into cash or whether you're going to hold it. Governance implications. So you'll see on the slide, cash first, and then donation to the charity. And in that case, you could issue a tax-deductible receipt, assume an IPC. So for those of you who don't know, that are institutions of public character are actually able to issue a tax-deductible receipt in the amount of 250% of the tax deduction where acceptable donations are made to the IPC. So if you are just receiving cash that has been converted from crypto prior to you receiving it, then it's treated as no different than a cash donation. Where it gets a little bit more complicated is if the donation itself is made in no tax-deductible receipt can be issued if you are an IPC receiving this kind of donation. And this is because cryptocurrency is not tax deduction. So there are certain types of donations in kind, like shares, certain approved artifacts, artworks, things that can actually be eligible for the issuance. But cryptocurrency, unfortunately, is not one of them. So, it really goes back to what you want to be able to do and what your donor expects from you. So if your donor really wants a tax-deductible receipt, if they are receiving taxable income in Singapore and they need tax deduction, then them donating to you in the form of cryptocurrency want. Charity accepts crypto directly. It also to cash right away, or whether it's going to hold it as an asset, potentially as part of its investments or its reserves. And this kind of consideration is something that has to be made quite deliberately, because once you hold cryptocurrency, you're exposed to the price volatility and other risks of the market. And then the assessment really becomes about whether holding these kinds of investments for purposes and your investment policies. There are also regulatory issues to consider, and this is where I'll hand it back to Adrian to go into some of these nuts and bolts for you to think about.
Thank you, Professor. So when we think about donations, whether it's fiat currency or cryptocurrencies, there are typically, I suppose, two broad areas that need to be considered. One would be financial regulatory implications, and the other one would that's meshed with things like tax considerations. So I just want to make a short detour here because of how you accept cryptocurrencies or fiat currency and the circumstances under which you accept it. Then is just to take a step back. When someone actually provides a service of handling or facilitating the buying and selling of cryptocurrencies or DPTs, there are licensing implications under our Payment Services Act. And it is actually, I would say it's not so easy to get a license. The standards that you need to fulfill and obligations and requirements, they're actually of a very, very high standards. So it's not easy to get a license. want to make sure is that as a charity, you don't inadvertently trigger licensing requirements on your part when you handle cryptocurrency donations, right? So I have actually set out 4 scenarios um, where uh, there may be certain implications. So the first scenario is essentially the charity, right? So as the professor mentioned, if the agreement is that the donor will give cryptocurrencies fiat currency, the donation is cryptocurrencies, then actually there are no financial regulatory implications on the part of the charity, because that donation is accepted and received and accepted as a currency. The charity, once it receives this money, can on its own volition decide to use a the cryptocurrency to fiat currency if it so chooses. But I think the point is there are no financial regulatory implications on the part of the charity if it receives and accepts cryptocurrency. There are other implications like the deductions, but now the next 3 slides that are prepared are essentially situations where the agreement is that the donor will donate fiat currency to the charity. So, for example, the first example would is in effect, the agreement, as I said, is to receive and accept fiat currency, but the donor starts off with cryptocurrency. So, means with the charity that whilst it will give cryptocurrency to the charity the cryptocurrency into fiat currency. Well, there is a risk there because what is happening here vis-a-vis the charity? The charity is promising the donor that it will take the donor's cryptocurrency, convert it into fiat currency, and then receive and accept that fiat currency. So, in effect, the charity could be seen as providing a regulated service of dealing in digital payment tokens under our Payment Services Act. Essentially, somebody carries on a service to buy and sell DPT or cryptocurrencies, then that actually triggers licensing requirements on the part of that service provider. And so the charity want to be careful to ensure that it doesn't actually things like that. So the charity cannot go around promising a donor that yes, we agree that you are donating fiat currency and you get that tax deduction, but don't worry, you can give me the cryptocurrency and I'll convert it for you before I receive and accept the fiat currency. That potentially triggers licensing requirements on the part of the charity, and as I said, it's difficult to get a license, and you probably, as a charity, the third one would be a situation where the essentially the charity provides a platform to the donor where it although it agrees that the donor will donate fiat currency to the charity wants to make it easy for the donor, and so the charity tell me how much cryptocurrency you want to donate. Tell me perhaps how much fiat currency you want to get from it. I have an arrangement with a licensed payment service provider. I will take your order or take your instructions and I'll transmit it to the DPT payment service provider, who will then contract with you to convert the cryptocurrency into fiat currency and then transmit it to me, the charity. That sounds like a pretty convenient situation, but the charity has got to be careful as well, because there is yet another regulatory activity uh, called DPT inducement, right? And essentially what DPT inducement means is if you carry on a business of providing a service where you induce or attempt to induce someone to buy or sell cryptocurrency, that in itself is a regulated activity. So I know it's a little difficult to understand, but maybe I'll put it this way. If you buy shares, right, securities, for example, usually you would have a broker to help you buy stocks and shares. How would the broker sell you the stocks and shares? Or rather, how would the broker help you to get those stocks and shares? Two ways. One, let's say I want to buy like telco shares of company X. And then on sell the telco shares to me. So that's one way. Another way could the broker acts as my agent. I tell it, hey broker, I want to buy 10 telco shares, and this is the price I'm willing to pay for it. The broker takes my order and places it with someone else, gets it executed so that so I eventually get the telco shares. So the broker acts as my agent in taking my order and placing it someone else or buying it on my behalf. So when you think about coming back to the issue, when you think about DPT inducement, it's similar to that. The order acts as an agent and helps to execution of the buying and selling of DPT. If you take an order or instructions from a donor and you place those instructions with someone else for the conversion of the crypto to fiat currency, the charity could be seen as somewhat like a broker, and that kind of activity, you got to be careful. Now, the final situation that I want to cover is this is the first scenario. How would the donor know to go to a DPT service provider to convert their cryptocurrencies into fiat currency for the purposes of the donation? Again, the range, you have to be careful with the arrangement, because if I'll put it this way, if you are a licensed DPT service provider in Singapore, there are certain restrictions as to advertisements that you can place on third-party websites vis-a-vis the public. Have an arrangement with the charity. You, the DPT service provider, have an arrangement with the charity. For example, you just place an advertisement on the charity that want to donate fiat currency, that they can use your crypto and get it converted in with you, the DPT service provider. Then technically that could be lines that the regulator has placed into effect, right? But I think the point here is that this is on the part of the DPT service provider. It's not on the part of the charity. But in any case, it's not insurmountable. I think you can actually finesse all of regulatory risk and achieve the outcome that you actually want to achieve. Okay, so that's what I have in terms of the financial regulatory. Professor, back to you.
Actually, before
Right, track of the pigeonhole as well. There's some really, really good questions that are coming in. I think we will actually be able to address most of them as we go the slides, but of course, if you feel that they're not sufficiently addressed, please feel free to ask them again. There was one question asking for a further explanation. If we could just go back to the slide with the green circles. There was a question that was asked about what really is being meant when we say that, before the donor commits to the donation and there's a conversion to fiat or to currency, what does that actually has crypto assets, a potential donor has crypto assets, about they want to make a donation to you, but before they do that, they convert the asset to cash or currency. And in that kind of situation, even though it comes out of a crypto asset, you're really looking at a cash donation that the charity is receiving. So what really is the thing that the charity is receiving? Is it crypto or is it money? Conversion is made after the crypto asset has been donated, then the donation is the cryptocurrency. But if the cryptocurrency is converted before the donation is made, then you're really just looking at a cash donation. So that's really all that's trying to explain. For the other questions that are coming through on Pigeonhole, we are going to be going through the elements through the slide, so just bear with me and hopefully we'll be able to address your questions. Okay, could we go back to the slide after the regulatory position? Okay, so we talked about some of the practical issues and, really thanks, Adrian, for going through the regulatory matters. Particularly when I deal with charities, I don't think people understand. We look at charities governance rules and I'll be going through some of them. But the reality is that we are dealing with, financial assets that have their own regulatory regime. So you do need to keep an eye on these kinds of laws as well, as much as you look at your own charities regulations and governance procedures. Okay, so coming back to charities governance, look at what actually governs how charities can hold and manage assets like cryptocurrency. Now, there's no specific rules that deal with cryptocurrencies, but the Commissioner of Charities guidance on charities engaging in business activities gives us some ideas that we can think about, okay? The guidance is not exactly on point for crypto, but the broad principles here in this guidance, I think, are quite instructive. And I've extracted the paragraphs that I think are useful, so you can always take a look at them in your own time if you want to know more detail. But I think the key takeaway here is that the emphasis is on prudence, transparency, and risk management. So what the Commissioner of Charities has said is that charities must not expose assets to significant risk and so charity boards, if they are considering accepting donations, they need to actively assess risk and return and to compare crypto against other investment options. And they should really not be investing in anything that is overly speculative or risky. Most importantly, investments have to be regularly reviewed. So holding on to something without reassessment is really not ethical. And actually, if a charity does regularly engage in or intend to engage in more speculative or risky investments or activities, what this particular guidance says is that there would be a need to spin off those activities into a separate business or social enterprise. And there's also a real backstop here under Section 26 of the Charities Act, which says that if assets aren't being properly applied, the Commissioner of Charities can step in, direct how they are being used. So the message here, I think, is quite simple. Just because cryptocurrency donations is not against the law, it's always a charity is really responsible ultimately and accountable for making that judgment.
Sorry, Professor, can I make a comment here?
Please.
So, I want to put it out there. It's not all and that you cannot hold cryptocurrencies. I think they may actually be reasons or valid reasons why you would want to hold cryptocurrencies. As I said right at the beginning, right, single currency stablecoins being technically a lot more stable than cryptocurrencies. Single currency stablecoins tend to be you could conceivably think of a situation where, as a charity, perhaps you want to hold single currency stablecoins because and they're not volatile, but you want to make blockchain technology in order to let's say transmit these cryptocurrencies to different places that require them urgently. And in fact, the transmission of these single currency stablecoins may prove to be faster than actually dispersing fiat currency funds the area that requires it. So I don't want people to think that, well, no, you can't use cryptocurrencies, you can't have cryptocurrency. Oh, I think how these cryptocurrencies may be more beneficial than even conventional fiat currency.
I thought it might be useful for the audience for us to give a real example. The power of stablecoins really is the fact that they're 24/7 and they're generally very low cost to send money, especially when you're talking about a cross-border use case or in instances where the velocity of money is very fast. I'll offer my enterprise as an example. We have a strategic partnership with Visa. One of our first few products was a prepaid Visa card, right? And as part of their requirement, Visa obviously requires us to hold a certain amount of capital, represent the average of all the transactions that our users have. We used to settle in fiat, and that took a while. Sending instructions to banks, the banks processing it, and then sending that on. So that takes anywhere from 1 to. We started experimenting, did a pilot project, Visa stablecoin, USDs specifically. And as a result of that, because the most important thing is that the speed at which the transaction, and that we're able to reduce our capital holding requirement, the safeguarding account. That enables us to be a lot more capital efficient, saved us a lot of money, and allowed us to really focus on what matters, which is the business at hand, on making sure our users are able to use crypto to pay, able to load their prepaid card. So it's something that, it's a story that applies to us, but merchants around the world.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those clarifications. I think that's so important. The practical differences, right, between the different them. But I think the point that I want to make is that really, you do need to go back to your governance frameworks and your governance structures of your charity and see whether what you are considering fits in with the framework. So to go back to the Charities Code of Governance, for example, if you look at Principle 4, this principle says that, a charity has to be well managed and plans for the future. Paragraphs that explain what this principle actually means. Very basic level, you need to regularly identify and review the key risks that the charity is exposed to and refer to the charity's processes to manage these risks. For larger tier 2 charities, which are charities which have gross annual receipts or total expenditure of $10 million or more, and all IPCs, there's regularly review them. And these include anti-money laundering, financing of terrorism policies, or AML and CFT policies. So as well as clear investment policies and clear AML and CFT policies, you also need to obtain advice from qualified professional advisors if this is deemed necessary by your board. Paragraph 4.6 is also instructive because it says that Tier 2 charities need to measure the impact of activities, including investments, while reviewing external risk factors and their likelihood of occurrence, and then respond to the key risks that support the sustainability of the charity. So all of these products that you might be considering, you need to remember that they should not really be treated any differently from any other type of investment or holding that the charity should consider. It really has to fit squarely within the charity's existing risk management, FT and investment governance framework. And this is something that has to be actively overseen by the board. Could we get the next slide, please? I thought it would be interesting to share some case law. So if you look at this UK case here, Harris and Church Commissioners for England, you will see that the principles in our Charities Commissioners guidelines are generally borne out in case law too. So in this UK decision, the UK courts found that it was fine for stewards of a charity to seek maximum investment returns, as long as this was commercially prudent and in line with well-established investment criteria, and of course, assuming that expert advice is taken where appropriate. That being said, the UK did something just because even if an investment is permitted, trustees can still decide not to invest if they reasonably think that it could conflict with the charity's mission or damage its reputation. And this includes concerns about how donors or beneficiaries act, or whether the investment sits uncomfortably with the charity's value. Crypto assets, and I'd be keen to hear the views from my fellow panelists as well, is that most crypto assets have environmental impacts. So while there are examples of cryptocurrencies that have taken steps to limit their carbon footprint, the digital mining production process for a lot of cryptocurrencies is very energy intensive. So this can pose donations, particularly those with environmental purposes. So you can see how the contradictions can come in there, right? If you're a charity that's meant to protect the environment and you're accepting donations like this, which are potentially harmful to the environment, then that is something that might be counter to your own charity's purpose and reason for existence. So really, in addition to investment management and AML and KYC considerations, as a charity, if you want to hold cryptocurrencies, it does make sense on charity's purpose.
Professor, if I may just quickly interject, I true that crypto mining validation mechanisms are like almost all economic activity will generate some kind of a carbon. The industry as a whole is moving towards more carbon efficient. We're very familiar with Bitcoin, which is the typo proof of work type cryptocurrency. But I would offer like the likes of Ethereum and others as which are proof of stake, which operate much more efficient energy. I think that's gonna make, and people are constantly working better than before. So let's not look at where the technology. I think there are some green shoots around adoption. Folks beginning to accept it into their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that's really good clarification and something to keep in mind, right? So to always consider the surrounding circumstances of the kind of crypto asset that you are considering, because there could be different variations in how they are mined and how they are developed. Okay, so let's go on to take a look at the Accounting Finance Handbook for Charities, because there you will find examples of how higher risk investments are provided for beyond just keeping reserves in fixed deposits. Now, of course, we had a discussion earlier about things like stable coins, which may not actually be that high risk to begin with, but to the extent that you are looking at crypto assets with a little bit more high risk, then you might want to think about the general principle risk in nature. And if you look at the Accounting and Finance Handbook for Charities, you'll see at page 21 that there's a reference to SATA ComHealth, which is a large charitable care services provider. It provides radiology, home care, and GP services to the vulnerable and the elderly. And they really say quite frankly that they aim for capital preservation, and they're also looking for long-term stable growth achieved through good returns and bearing a prudent level of risk. I like this example because they talk quite frankly about their losses during various financial crises that did. And while they don't refer to crypto, the example is quite detailed on the kinds of financial risk and reward that charities can consider when they're looking at their investment policies. Further towards the end of this guide, you will also see references being made to tactical asset allocation, which is a more dynamic approach applied over the short term to capitalize on immediate market opportunities. And this is something that charities can apply as a strategy, but because it creates an active element of risk for a higher return, it's recommended that it only be applied in a limited way. So you do need to go back to your original strategy mix, which ensures long-term stable gains. As long as your short-term gains are realized, you need to go back to what your strategy was previously. So there are some guidelines and you can find that in the Accounting and Finance Handbook for Charities. Could I get the next slide, please? Okay, so that being said, in the UK, we found some examples of how the Charities Commissioner has cracked down on charities for making speculative and high-risk investments. We haven't really seen the equivalent in Singapore yet for crypto investments, but our laws in Singapore are really not that different from the UK, and this gives us a good sense of what's at stake if assets actually are mismanaged. The next slide that I'll talk about really goes into AML and CFT risks, and I think this is something that a number of you have asked questions on, so hopefully this next part of the presentation takes care of those concerns. And one of the main risks for charities accepting crypto is really the due diligence risk. Because of the increased anonymity of donors, charities may not be easily able to identify donors of cryptocurrency, and there's a higher chance that criminals, money launderers, and terrorist financiers may seek to route money to charities, and accordingly, charities face the risk that they may receive funding from donors that they do not wish to be associated with. So then what does happen if a charity accepts illicit funding because it is not aware of who the donor is? The legislation that you need to see, actually, could I get the next slide, please? Slide here. And what happens is that the charity can potentially face penalties under the Corruption, Drug Trafficking and Other Serious Crimes Confiscation of Benefits Act, or the CDSA. And the CDSA states that it is an offence for any person or entity to possess or use property that is reasonably suspected to be linked to criminal conduct. And the penalties are quite significant for individuals. We're looking at up to $150,000 in fines or 3 years in jail, or both. And for non-individuals, including charities, we're looking at fines of up to $300,000. So if you are a charity that has received crypto that is later linked to criminal activity and you cannot account for the source of those funds, you may face criminal liability even if you have acted in good faith. So it is therefore quite important to have robust donor due diligence and source. So what then can a charity do to protect itself? And there's some guidance here available in Singapore, and I've extracted statements from 2 of them, which are on the next slide, if we could move to it. Thank you. And really to summarize, while charities can adopt a risk-based approach, I mean, this is basically what the guidances say, charities can adopt a risk-based approach to donor due diligence, so you don't have to check everything. You can adopt a risk-based approach. What is recommended is that charities actually only accept crypto donations through MAS licensed platforms that are already regulated for AML and CFT. So this is something that keeps coming up in all of the guidances and really is the way that you should be going if you're thinking about accepting crypto donations. Can I get the next slide, please? So you might then ask, right, why would criminals make donations to charities for the sake of it? And does this even really happen in real life? And the short answer is yes, it has happened. And there's an example that's on the slide that you can see now. Basically, what happened here was that hackers posted donations that they made to 2 block, which facilitates cryptocurrency donations. The Giving block then claimed that it was not aware that these donations were made by cyber criminals. So there's quite a few reports on this case online. It's quite easy to look up. I encourage you to do it if you're interested to read more. And when Brett Callow is his name, a threat analyst at a cybersecurity company, was interviewed regarding this situation, what he said I thought was quite interesting. He said, what criminals hope to achieve by making these kinds of donations is not at all clear. Perhaps it helps to assuage their guilt. Or perhaps it's for egotistical reasons that they want to be perceived as a Robin Hood-like character rather than the B box online system. And they revealed in reports that they were not asked any identity verification questions. So this case, I think, just highlights the complexity and dangers of anonymous crypto donations. It really can be quite difficult to find out who owns the wallet, who your donor really is. And so these are risks that you are right. Those of you who flagged the issue in Pigeonhole, you're right to note that these are very, very big risks that charities do need to be aware of how to manage. I'll next highlight some donor red flags that are also taken from the guidance template for anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism policies and procedures for charities, and also from the Singapore Police Force. And really the last bullet point is what I want to highlight here, where where donations involve virtual assets and the ownership of those virtual assets cannot be easily traced to the donor. So this is something that the authorities recognize as a risk, something that has already been flagged. So then how do we manage this risk, right? And for this, there's actually a very good article that was written by PillNet, which is available online. And you can read that. According to the PillNet report, what it really highlights, over and over again, is that if a charity were to accept crypto, then donor identification is critical. So as far as possible, donors should identify themselves and prove that they control their users to identify themselves, then the charity should generally decline the donation. And the only exception, perhaps, is where the cryptocurrency comes through a regulated MAS licensed exchange that has already done the AML and CFT checks. So again, we keep coming back to the importance of working with regulated platforms. And my fellow panelists will be able to tell us more about the kinds of AML and CFT checks that they do and the kinds of assurance that they provide us. Would you like to tell us a bit more about that?
Thanks, Professor. You know, the last time I checked, which was yesterday, the 6 entities that have received a license from MAS to do crypto-related activities. Now, to provide you with context, 36 is actually a fairly low number because MAS doesn't actually have any uh, um, uh, fixed number as to how many licenses it can issue. In fact, as long as you meet the prescribed standards, you are likely to be able to get the license. But the legislation for cryptocurrencies came out in January of 2020. So that's many, many years ago, I think 5 or 6 years ago. And according to newspaper report, only 36 of them have successfully received the license. Chintascrypto.com being one of them. What is the reason why it's such a limited number of entities that have the license? It's because it's stringent, and one of the key things that the regulator will focus on is AML CFT standards that the cryptocurrency service provider holds up. So that comes under PSN 02 of a certain set of notices. Essentially, you got to have very stringent policies and procedures to prevent money laundering. And there is a particular focus on this thing called the travel rule, which requires a DPT service provider or crypto service provider to either receive certain information, like the name of the person sending the cryptocurrency or the unique identifier of that person, or transmit that information depending on which stage of the transaction the DPT service provider is, whether they are helping someone send the cryptocurrency, an intermediary in the arrangement, or whether they are helping someone receive that cryptocurrency. So, to add to Professor Usha's point, if you go through an MAS regulated DPT service provider, the likelihood is these AML standards would have been tested, they would have been looked at by the regulator, and they are likely to be of a decently high standard.
Maybe I can just add in a little bit as a regulated entity under the Monetary Authority of Singapore. So Crypto.com, maybe a few quick words of introduction. We are headquartered here in Singapore, also licensed by regulators in the US, Europe, Middle East. We consider ourselves one of the most regulated exchanges in the world. We have 150 million users on our platform. I think the numbers speak for itself. I just want to confirm that indeed the licensing process is very rigorous. Getting the license is only the first step. Maintaining a world-class compliance program is where the challenge comes in. And the commitment of any licensed DPT holder, not just us, right, is the commitment has to come from leadership, because it is a real investment of resources, time, and management bandwidth to make sure that we're able to live up to the standards established or required by the various jurisdictions that we operate in. What the MAS is looking for in a DPT license holder are few capabilities, right? One is obviously we'll do sanction screening, we'll do transaction monitoring, we'll do enhanced due diligence on certain politically exposed persons, no different from a traditional financial institution, right? In addition to that, we also require to demonstrate to the authorities that we have a good handle on technology risk management, that we are conducting our business. It's called the business conduct rules around conflict of interest. We have no conflicts of interest. We are, for example, we also operate a custody, and business is not allowed to do any DPT trading or dealing of its own, right? There's a lot of hiving off and protection that's very defined within the rules that the MAS has set up. The last big bucket that's come out more recently is consumer protection. I think the authorities have acted quite wisely in this case to make sure that retail investors are protected, because it's a new and quickly evolving space. Myself, I've only been in it for 3 years, and I'm learning something new every day. Like this panel, ladies and gentlemen, is as informative for me as it is, I hope it has been for everybody who's watching in. So these are some of the things that a licensed DPT holder will bring to the table that unlicensed exchanges or service providers may not have. Happy to answer any more questions about it. I see there are some questions on Pigeonhole. Maybe I'll just touch on one because we talked about the anonymity of a crypto wallet for a couple of times already. The technical term is actually pseudonymity. The blockchain wallets are clearly reflected and can be queried on the blockchain. Blockchains are generally public. They're private blockchains, but generally when we talk about blockchain and most of cryptocurrencies, we're talking about public blockchains, right? So not only can you see how much cryptocurrency is associated with a wallet, you can also see when transactions come in and out and how much they are. So I think the truth is a little bit more nuanced. Some will argue that it's quite difficult to money launder because everything is being tracked and traced. On the other hand, you don't actually know who owns or controls these wallets, right? Which is why, to Professor's point earlier, donors need to identify themselves, right? That's why there are things like the travel rule to demonstrate control over a wallet so that we can see this conjunction or the ownership between different wallets through the blockchain. And for us, we are required to identify and KYC every single one of 150 million users. So it requires tremendous effort. I think no investment or undertaking will ever be risk-free, but we do our best to try to minimize that for our users.
Thanks for that, Chita. So just to be clear then, that means that if charities work with licensed platforms, then you will actually do the AML and KYC checks that they can rely on.
Yes, indeed. In fact, what I was going to say, and I say this just as a matter of sharing, because we have worked with charities in Singapore before. There is interest within our ecosystem of users who do want to donate in cryptocurrency. One of the things that actually is a bit of a stumbling block is our own due diligence procedures on the charities. Because as Professor, you have mentioned earlier, sometimes criminal organizations use charities to launder money. So we are very conscious of that because we are on the hook for our licenses, right? The one misstep will mean that if we allow in a tainted blockchain transaction, and then we are in very big trouble with regulators, not just in Singapore, but other regional and global regulators as well. So we have a reputation to maintain. We are the business of trust. So this is something that we watch very, very close.
On direction, right? How do we guarantee that, donors are not sort of doing nefarious things? But hey, you know what? You have to check on charities as well to make sure 100%. That they are not being abused or used wrongly. So thanks for that. I learned something new today as well. Okay, so let's just wrap up very quickly on the overall sort of considerations that you need to take into account when you are thinking about whether or not you want to hold crypto. So there's different heads here that we need to address, but in short, a charity can hold crypto really only if its board has done the proper governance work that it needs to do. And this really means assessing risk and returns, ensuring that the holding of the crypto does not expose your charitable assets to significant, and really comparing it objectively against other investment options, just like how you would consider any other investment policy that you are trying to set up for your charity. The board should seek professional advice, regularly review whether crypto should be retained or converted to fiat if it does decide to hold crypto, and really ensure that decisions are commercially prudent. And critically, this is something that has to be driven by a charity's interests, including whether the crypto genuinely helps to reach new donors and whether the crypto holding is in line with the charity's broader purposes. I saw a question in the Pigeonhole about how many charities accept cryptocurrency as donations. I don't have a clear number. I don't know if anyone else on the panel has a specific number. To my knowledge, it's a small number of charities, and really from what I hear on the ground, it's more to broaden the donor pool than it is to actually receive large sums of money. So as far as I know, not huge amounts are donated through this channel, but charities that do have it seem they anticipate that lots of new donors may be interested in donating in this way, and so they want to make sure that the functionality is there when those donors decide to actually make the donations. So in addition to governance, I just want to highlight that a charity actually needs to have basic technical competence as well before holding crypto. And this means understanding how crypto markets work, being clear on which kinds of assets it will accept. As the panelists have mentioned today, there are so many different types of crypto assets, right? So it's really not quite accurate also to say that they're always going to be high risk or of a certain nature. There's many different types, and you do need to, research them and find out the nature of each and every one of them and whether or not they're suitable for your holdings. You need to understand how crypto markets work. You need to know what platforms you could use. You need to know what a wallet is and how to manage it safely. And without this kind of technical capability, then holding crypto becomes quite a big operational risk, which can then lead to other types of risks as well. So you need knowledge. So the next question for charities really is, are you willing to make that investment in the infrastructure of working with a licensed service provider, of training your own people to understand how these kinds of donations work, what these assets really are? As you can see from the things that we've been talking about, it's really not such a straightforward assessment. And so you need to look at your charity, right? How big are you? Is this an investment that you're willing to make? Do you really see a potential payoff? Or is it going to be the case that the cost of the investment is really too much compared to what you need to do as your main charitable purpose? And if you invest in it, it takes away from what your charity is meant to be doing, then it's really not something that is too suitable for your purposes. So you do also need to think about liquidity and security risks before you hold crypto. So charities need to consider whether crypto volatility, if you are looking at more volatile types of crypto, are they going to impair your ability to deploy funds when they are needed? And are your reserves actually large and diversified enough to absorb that risk if it exists? There are also security risks. You need to think about the risk of hacking, fraud, lost keys or passwords. Do you have internal controls to make sure that your employees don't commit any kind of fraud? Can these kinds of losses actually be insured? If these risks cannot be managed, or if these are things that you are not sure about, then you really should think twice about whether you want to accept this functionality. For AML and CFT concerns, I think we talked quite a lot about that already. And really, I think, to summarize, if I could just get the next slide, please. The takeaway that we really just want to leave with you today is that accepting crypto is really only appropriate when the charity works through regulated intermediaries. So you're really looking at MAS licensed DPT service providers that carry out their own kind of AML and CFT screening. Now, on the charity's part, they need to have clear policies that really set out when it will accept or decline crypto, what kind of donor information is required from the intermediary that it works with. And if the charity cannot get this kind of information or explain the source of funds with the help of its intermediary partner, then the crypto really should not be accepted. And of course, underlying all of this in principle is the idea that it needs to be something that is aligned with your overall charitable purposes. So do any charities or nonprofits actually hold crypto? We talked about this a little. I think some do. The next slide gives you a sense of some examples. Oh, no, the slide before that. Oh, are we missing a slide? Oh, no, we're not. I'm sorry. It's me. That's mixed them up. That's all right. If we could have the next slide, please. So before we look at examples of different charities that accept crypto, I thought it would be useful to also take a look at how other jurisdictions view crypto donations for charities. In the UK, the regulators tend to treat crypto as a high-risk investment, and they say that it is suitable only where a charity has a sufficiently large and diversified pool of reserves to spread risk. I think this is no different from the things that we've been talking about in a Singapore context. We can see that in the UK, there's very similar sentiments. In Australia, the wording used is actually slightly stronger. The regulators there say that crypto investments are generally regarded as not appropriate for charities. And so internationally, the trend seems to be one of caution. Crypto is viewed as high risk and unsuitable unless you are a well-resourced charity with strong governance and you have comprehensive implementation plans and due diligence processes. If you are looking at investigating or designing a policy for yourself, take a look at the Australian authorities' information online. I feel like they provide very, very good detailed guidance as to how you might build your own internal processes and policies if you're thinking of accepting cryptocurrency donations. So those are two good jurisdictions to take a look at. Okay, on to the next slide now. Okay, so this is where we talk about different types of charities that accept crypto. You see some large organizations there, Kofi Annan Foundation, Salvation Army in the US, Singapore Red Cross accepts crypto donations. Really what we see with most mainstream charities is that they would accept crypto as a donation channel, and almost all of them that I found online would convert the crypto to fiat immediately or very, very shortly after the donation is received. You do have crypto native foundations like the Ethereum Foundation and the Solana Foundation. And these are examples of organizations that continue to hold the crypto assets in the long term. But of course, these are fintech entities, and perhaps it is not unexpected that they would hold the assets because, of course, they have the expertise and the ability to manage them well. So really to sum up, our suggested approach for this presentation is that, unless you are confident about how you're going to hold crypto assets, if you want to hold assets, you should really consider thinking about crypto as a potential donation channel if you're a charity, and not really as an asset allocation or holding strategy unless you are very, very confident that you know how to manage it and it really sits well with the rest of your investment policies and is in line with all the policies of prudence that you need to have in place as a well-governed charity. And really, I think if there's only one takeaway that you are going to take away from this presentation, let it be the second bullet point there, which says that, you really should transact with cryptocurrency exchanges that are licensed by MAS and can provide the necessary AML and CFT assurances that you need in order to be compliant with your own obligations under charities governance rules. So that takes me to the end of my bit of my presentation. Shall we move on to questions?
Perfect. Yeah. Adrian, Chandradas, Usha, thank you so much. We'll jump into some questions. And one burning question we have in this is for Chinta. Operationally, say these charities are very convinced that they want to now start accepting crypto donations. How do they do this? Also custodial, non-custodial, how do you accept it? By MetaMask, by crypto.com? How do they start this?
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. I think it's important to kind of like set some baseline understanding, right? Like out in the kind of like the internet, when people talk about crypto, we are often talking about non-custodial wallets, right? Non-custodial wallets are wallets that we control ourselves as individuals. That's the promise of blockchain and Web3, where you are in control of your own identity, your money, and your cryptocurrency, right? However, when you interject a digital payment token provider into the mix, we are what is called we are custodians. We will perform the service for you, including safekeeping your tokens. So the easiest way, and we've had some discussions with charities in Singapore and elsewhere. Indeed, they prefer to settle in fiat. They do not want to be holding crypto for a number of different reasons that we've already discussed. And what we will do for them is we will manage their wallet, which is a custodial one, because we secure and safekeep that on their behalf. And that is where they receive their crypto donations. When they receive a donation, some of the charities will request that they are immediately exchanged for fiat currency of their choice, often Singapore dollar or US dollar, right? So what they see actually in terms of the entire experience is that they only ever touch fiat currency. They never touch crypto. They don't hold it. They have a crypto wallet, but oftentimes the balance there is denoted in fiat currency, right? Because at no point does crypto actually enter their wallet. It comes to us, we convert it and we deposit it into their wallet or into their bank account, fiat currency. So it's a fairly seamless process. We're not the only service provider. I would encourage everybody to do their own research. It's not a stump for crypto.com. Obviously, we would love to work with you guys, but I think it's very important. That's one of the things I would encourage everyone to do, is to do your own research. It's something we say a lot in the crypto and Web3 industry, and talk to people to understand what the technology entails and what are the services that are being rendered.
If I could add to that, right, just the distinction between custodial wallets and non-custodial wallets. One might think, well, why don't we just use non-custodial wallets? We control it ourselves, so it cuts out the middleman, right? Isn't that better? Well, in a way, yes, but the thing to remember when you distinguish between these two kinds of wallets is this. With custodial wallets, essentially that means that the intermediary actually has control or possession over the underlying DPT in the wallet. So that's not, you might think, oh, is that a good thing, a bad thing? Well, that's a good thing, I think, because it means that the intermediary actually has control over private keys, or at least one of multiple private keys, or shards of a single private key. Basically, it means that if you, the customer, lose your password, for example, the intermediary can come in and help you retrieve your cryptocurrency in the wallet, in the custodial wallet. If you talk about non-custodial wallets, it's really the wallets that, as individuals, for example, you keep yourself. So nobody else has access to the wallet. Nobody has control or possession to the DPT in the wallet, which means that if you lose your key, that's it. Nobody can help you. So I think it's not a bad thing to consider custodial wallets, especially those that are offered by licensed DPT service providers.
Yeah, if I could just jump in here with a really fun and I guess a cautionary tale. There's this famous story of somebody who lost his I think it's his thumb drive containing all his Bitcoin. So that's actually inaccurate technically. What happened was he lost his keys, which were in the thumb drive, right? And he spent a lot of money and a lot of time advocating with municipal governments to allow him to go to the garbage dump to find his the thumb drive that had his crypto keys. He did, and he had to give up after I think 5, 6, 7 years. I don't know how much it is at great cost. But that just goes to illustrate, if you lose either the drive with your keys, if you lose your keys, right, the crypto is lost forever. The good news is nobody else can access it. But the bad news is you also can't access it, right? So I think there's an argument to be made both ways. It depends on your own kind of like perspective on risk. But here I'm addressing the individual. I think for charities, the panel generally agrees that it's probably a lesser risk route to go with a licensed service provider.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We have another question that came in, tax related. So the question is, are there any recent or upcoming updates from IRAS regarding the tax deductible status, so IPC status of cryptocurrency donations?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'll take that one. Not that I know of. So in preparing for this particular presentation, my team actually checked in with IRAS on the tax deductible position with cryptocurrencies. I mean, we know what the position is, but we did go in and check in with IRAS as well. And cryptocurrency, unfortunately, is not something that is going to be an acceptable donation for the purposes of getting your 250% tax deduction. There are no updates that I know of that are coming out, and so I'm not expecting to see anything anytime soon. But now that we've all prepared for this talk and we've all done this presentation, I think it's something I will be actively looking out for in the future.
Okay, perfect. We had another question. So I mean, we've kind of answered it before in terms of what providers should charities use, and we talked about MAS regulated providers. Are there any criteria for selecting the providers?
So actually, if you go to the MAS website, it's called the Financial Institutions Directory. Basically, all financial institutions that are licensed by MAS are listed there. So there's a specific category that talks about payment services, and then a subcategory that talks about people that have that hold the license to be able to provide digital payment token services. And as I said, last time I checked, there were 36 of them there. So that's essentially where you can find, information about who is licensed in Singapore. And if you click on the website and you go to these individual companies, typically, I think the website actually has the phone number, and if not, the email address of the company, and in any case, the full name is there, so you can just Google it on the internet.
If I can just chime in really quickly, I think this ends up, if we are already operating within the limited pool of 36 licensed DPT service providers, then the next point will be which one offers the best service. So more generally, you're looking at liquidity, you're looking at pricing, you're looking at transaction speed, how often do they settle, how often do they pay out to your bank account. These are the things that matter to the folks in the merchants as well as the charities that we work with. These are operational matters, and it's a business deal. But again, it's within this pool of licensed DPT players. I had a question. If I could just go back like like a minute or two into the conversation around what if the tax deductible nature of crypto donations. How would the tax authorities consider if, in the case of the service I just described, where the donation is made in crypto, was immediately converted to fiat and deposited into the charity's bank accounts in Singapore dollar?
Yeah.
How would that be seen? Because technically, the charity did not handle cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I think to me, the question is, what is the charity entitled to?
Mm.
The charity is entitled to the crypto. What then happens in terms of the conversion, regardless of how quickly that happens, is a separate question.
Sure.
So if I was looking at it, I would say, look, you are giving me cryptocurrency. I can choose, right, whether to hold it indefinitely. I can choose to convert it within 3 seconds, within 3 days. But if what I'm receiving is cryptocurrency, then that is the benefit that I'm getting that's being donated to me. So I would take the view that that would not actually be something that you could get a tax deductible receipt for. But again, really, the tax deductible receipt only matters if you want it.
Sure.
So if you don't have any taxable income in Singapore that this tax deduction would actually help to alleviate, right, then it's maybe not going to be necessary for you. So there's a couple of considerations there that you do need to think about for your donors.
This is really fascinating because as stable coins kind of like gain adoption, and in the future, maybe something called CBDCs with central bank digital currencies, right? We already have a Singapore stable. In fact, we have several. They are in some would they are as good as cash. So it will be interesting, but technically, as we have discussed earlier, they are all DPTs, so they will not be eligible for some of these tax deductions. So I guess my takeaway from this is the space is evolving pretty quickly. I think it's certainly a space for us to continue to watch.
Yeah.
And I think my prediction also in terms of stable coins, you find that there is a movement with all regulators in major financial centers to come up with stable coin issuer laws, right? So essentially, if you want to issue a stable coin, you need to meet certain criteria. And you will see, I've looked at places like, of course, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, the EU, America with the Genius Act. All of these places have a confluence of standards that are required for stablecoin issuers, which means that I think at least in the short run, you'll see more and more people wanting to issue stablecoins. So that is, I think, it's promising, at least in the context of using stablecoins for donations to charities.
Okay, perfect. I think we have time for one last question. One question we have in selecting the one best on based on your criteria and whatnot is, are there separate fee structures for charities and nonprofits coming through? Is there a separate onboarding process for them, or do they go through the same KYB process?
They go through the same KYB process. There's no separate fee structure simply because the business is so nascent in Singapore. I saw this other question around this MPO shopping around for service providers and not being able to kind of like find somebody they could work with, because the business is this line of business is specifically quite new. But I would imagine for most service providers, they will be interested to at least have that conversation.
Okay, perfect. Actually, we have probably one more. Question.
Maybe I want to ask a question about, I suppose, interesting ways of charities using crypto, because there's an example that I came across when I was doing some research. Accepts cryptocurrency and then actually pays out the cryptocurrency to beneficiaries in that form. So there's no conversion to fiat at all. And the thinking there is that, well, it's actually easier to get these payments out to beneficiaries in certain jurisdictions than it is to actually get cash out through traditional financial systems.
Yes.
And I thought that was quite fascinating. And if you look at the reports online, people say that they're monitoring this to see how it's going to develop using crypto assets. And I wondered if both of you had any thoughts on that.
Right. Well, I think it touches on the point that I made earlier about, like, if you are the board of a charity and you think about whether it's appropriate to accept single currency stable coins, you look at things like the speed of deployment to the affected areas, right? And single currency stable coins do have that advantage. Now, this is not this whole idea of deployment quickly and all that is not a new concept. I mean, if you look at countries like El Salvador, a couple of years ago, they actually accepted Bitcoin as currency in their country. They've stopped, but the reason why they did because actually Bitcoin was proved to be more stable back then compared to their domestic currency. And Bitcoin was a lot more convenient to use because essentially all you need is an app and a smartphone, right? Um, so this idea of I see stable coins being used for these kinds of charitable deployments as almost like a evolution of using conventional cryptocurrencies because the stable coins have the stability and that is better obviously than the volatility of traditional cryptocurrencies. But the single currency stablecoins also have all the rest of the advantages that go with cryptocurrencies, like the speed of deployment, the immutability because they're on the blockchain, and so on and so forth. So certainly, I think it's something that will an area that is provides a lot of opportunities to charities. Shinta.
Super exciting. It's one of the projects we wanted to run a couple of years ago. Cryptocurrency, or let me speak more generally, digital assets on the blockchain, right, have a few applications that are quite killer when it comes to payments and even charitable giving. Number one, if you're a charity, because of the immutable nature of the blockchain, provenance of the funds is known. You know where the cryptocurrency or digital assets coming from, right? Tainted or not tainted, I think you have that accountability that I think your board over time, if they are more comfortable with technology, will grow to appreciate because you can't fudge around with it. It is there for everyone to query. The other thing that sets cryptocurrency apart, and I think Adrian already mentioned it, you only need an internet connection and a cell phone, right? That's pretty powerful, and which is why we have seen adoption rates very high in countries where maybe institutions or their national currency are a little bit less stable. That stable coins, the US stable coin, like Bitcoin, are a better hedge against inflation than their national currency. And the last one is a very interesting one, which is, Professor, you mentioned it earlier, which is smart contracts. You talked about the UNICEF example. To deploy digital assets or cryptocurrencies as for the donees, the folks to use, right? Imagine you're in a refugee camp or disaster recovery camp. You can actually use smart contracts to limit the use of those token, be a single currency stablecoin, to only say milk powder or daily essentials. It cannot be used to spend on non-essentials, right? It's like a voucher that's tied to certain SKUs. And you can do that quite easily with smart contracts. It's built into the technology. You can do that already. You can do that much more easily because the alternatives today are some kind of pre-issued prepaid card or something that's a bit clunky.
Yeah.
But here you only need a cell phone and an internet connection to.
No, that's so interesting. And I think, we've been talking about regulation, governance, but, there's really sort of interesting solutions for charities to think about in terms of the beneficiaries that you want to serve and the jurisdictions you want to operate in. So thanks for explaining that.
Well, sadly, we are out of time. Before we wrap up, I'd like to invite each of you guys to take away from today's session. Maybe we can start with Usha.
Oh, gosh. Read the slides. Some of you have requested to have the slides from this presentation, which we're very happy to share. But I think, it's of course very important to preserve your investments, preserve your capital, look at stable financial growth, not take unnecessary risks as a charity. But at the same time, I think we should not be closed off to the possibilities of what new technologies can do. And I think, if we keep one eye on the gut and all the risks that we need to think about, then we can responsibly consider the benefits and potential that new technologies can offer us.
Adrian?
Well, we keep repeating this idea of using licensed DPT service providers. But I would want to add to that, even if you choose a licensed DPT service provider, the specific arrangement that you on with the DPT service provider as to how the crypto converted to fiat currency actually makes a difference. It's not that as long as a licensed DPT service provider is in play, everything is fine, right? You still need to be quite careful about how you map out this arrangement, and you need to ensure that as a charity you as well. So please do bear that in mind.
I'm gonna say something quite similar to what Usha mentioned earlier, which is in any new area, I think it's quite healthy and protective to have a certain level of skepticism, right? Also curiosity, especially as adoption continues to grow, the technology continues to develop. I think there are many exciting opportunities that are on the horizon. That small experiments around digital assets and cryptocurrencies are within your envelope of risk that you're comfortable with, just to better understand the technology and to be ready for the future.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, everyone. If you wish to rewatch this webinar or inform your colleagues who missed today's webinar, the recordings of this webinar will be on Pro Bono SG's YouTube channel in 2 weeks. And check out the link shared in the chat function. And also a copy of the slides will also be shared with all participants. At the end of this webinar, a survey form will pop up on your screen for your completion. We appreciate your comments as it would be used to improve future webinars. And after today's fantastic sharing from our panelists, if you find that your charity requires legal guidance on your issues, do write to our nonprofit legal services at nls@probono.sg. And lastly, I'd like to thank our 3 panelists for sharing their knowledge and experience with us. And with that said, on behalf of Pro Bono SG and SFA, we'd like to thank you all for joining us today and have a great week ahead. Thank you.